Have you ever shown up for someone else only to find yourself standing face to face with the life you never thought you deserved? Evelyn Hartley wasn't looking for love when she stepped into that gala. She wasn't even looking for attention. She was just there for her cousin, trying to steady a trembling hand and disappear into the wallpaper like she always did. 42, quietly carrying the weight of a mother slipping into memory loss, and a heart stitched back together after being left behind, Evelyn had learned how to survive in silence. But what if, in the middle of someone else's spotlight, you were the one seen? What if the man who owned the room didn't want to impress you, but to understand you? What would you do if love didn't ask you to become someone new, but simply invited you to stay as you are? This is a story about slow trust, unexpected beginnings, and the courage it takes to build something that lasts not in grand gestures, but in the quiet, steady choice to stay. So, take a breath, open your heart, and come with us. If this story touches something in you, please like, share, and subscribe, because sometimes one story can bring us all a little closer. Ready to begin the story whenever you are. Evelyn Hartley hadn't worn heels in almost a decade. The last time she'd tried, she twisted her ankle on the uneven steps of her mother's porch and decided then and there that flats were more honest. But tonight, against her better judgment, and despite the dull ache already creeping into her toes, she stood in the hallway of her cousin's apartment, smoothing down the hem of an old navy dress. "You look fine," Evelyn said without turning, her voice calm as ever. "I look like a fraud," Charlotte whispered behind her. "I don't belong at these things. Ev, these people, they notice everything. They'll know." Evelyn turned, her gaze softening. Charlotte stood there, trembling slightly in a floor-length gown that shimmered like moonlight. Her makeup was perfect. Her posture was not. "They won't see anything you don't let them," Evelyn replied. "And even if they do, you don't owe them a damn thing." Charlotte let out a shaky breath and nodded. But Evelyn saw the doubt lingering in her eyes. That's why she was here. Not to socialize, not to network, and certainly not to be seen. She was here because Charlotte, newly minted into the high-stakes world of philanthropic finance, had begged her to come, one familiar face in a sea of strangers. "I'll stay near the wall," Evelyn said, teasing lightly, very inconspicuous, like expensive wallpaper. That earned a small laugh. "You're the only person who can make sarcasm feel like a warm blanket." "I've had years of practice," Evelyn muttered, more to herself than to Charlotte. Outside, the town car waited, sleek and silent. Charlotte clutched her clutch like a lifeline, and Evelyn climbed in behind her, her expression unreadable. As the city lights blurred past the window, Evelyn let herself drift, letting the rhythm of the road settle her nerves. She didn't belong in this world either, not anymore. Maybe not ever. The Blackridge Hotel stood like something out of a film, marble columns, gold trim, and windows glowing like candlelight in the dusk. A doorman opened their door with a nod, and Charlotte stepped out first, drawing a breath like she was stepping onto a stage. Evelyn followed more slowly. She felt the shift the moment her shoes touched the stone path. Not fear, just distance, like she'd wandered into someone else's dream. Inside, the ballroom stretched wide, a wash of crystal and velvet. Chandeliers dripping light like rain. Waiters glided by with flutes of champagne and canapes that looked too pretty to eat. And everywhere people shimmered in diamonds, in silk, in effortless, moneyed grace. Charlotte grabbed her arm. "Breathe," Evelyn whispered. "I'm here." "Thank you," Charlotte replied. And then, with surprising courage, she stepped away into the crowd. Evelyn made her way to the bar, ordered water with lemon, no garnish, and leaned lightly against the counter, scanning the room like a woman waiting out a storm. That's when she saw him. At first, he didn't seem different from the rest. Tall, dark suit, clean-shaven. But then he laughed, not the rehearsed chuckle of small talk, but something real, low, and amused. And when he looked her way, Evelyn's heart did something unexpected. It paused. His gaze didn't slide past her like everyone else's had. It landed, stayed, not predatory, not curious, just aware. He approached without pretense, holding a glass of something golden in his hand. "Is this seat taken?" he asked, his voice steady, warm. Evelyn arched a brow. "You're a little overdressed for a bar stool?" He smiled, unfazed. "So are you." She looked away, hiding the curve of her mouth. "Go ahead. It's free." He sat beside her, his movements deliberate, grounded. "I haven't seen you at these events before," he said. "That's because I usually spend my Friday nights making grilled cheese and re-watching documentaries about beavers." He chuckled, surprised, maybe impressed. "Sounds educational, surprisingly emotional." She deadpanned. "Those little guys really commit to their craft." Another laugh. Then a moment of quiet passed between them, not awkward, but full. "I'm Nathaniel Caldwell," he said finally, offering a hand. Evelyn hesitated, then shook it. His grip was firm, but not showy. "Evelyn Hartley." He tilted his head. "Evelyn, that suits you. And you?" she asked. "Nathaniel sounds like someone who wears cufflinks to bed." He grinned. "Only on holidays." "Let me guess. You're one of the board members." He paused. "Something like that." The moment hung, then broke with the chime of glass tapping glass. A speaker took the stage. People turned. Evelyn exhaled, grateful for the interruption, but Nathaniel leaned in slightly, close enough to be heard, not close enough to presume. "Come find me later," he said. Evelyn blinked. "And if I don't, I'll find you." He stood and vanished into the crowd, leaving Evelyn with her glass. Her pulse quickened, and a question echoing somewhere beneath her ribs. What just happened? Nathaniel Caldwell hadn't expected to enjoy himself tonight. These galas were usually obligations-polished affairs with sharp tuxedos and softer lies, full of people shaking hands without ever looking one another in the eye. He hosted them because he had to, because the world he'd built demanded a certain kind of presence. But she, Evelyn Hartley, hadn't played by the rules. There was something about her. The way she held herself, not stiff, but self-contained. The way she didn't flinch under his gaze, didn't lean in like others did when they realized who he was. She didn't care that his name was on the program, or that half the room owed him favors. She didn't even pretend to be impressed. And somehow, that made him want to impress her. He watched her now from across the room as the speaker wrapped up with practiced charm. She hadn't looked his way again. Was she avoiding him, or simply uninterested? The idea stung more than he liked. A man in a silver suit approached him with a glass of scotch. Quite the turnout tonight. Nate, Nathaniel nodded. It's for a good cause? It always is. But this one's personal, right? Youth development. Nate's gaze drifted to the silent auction table. It started that way. The man didn't catch the shift in tone. He slapped Nate on the shoulder and laughed. Well, you know how to throw a party. Nate forced a smile and excused himself. He wasn't here to talk business tonight. Not really. Not when someone else had caught his attention in a way no stock portfolio or development deal had in years. By the time he reached the bar again, Evelyn was gone. He found her near the back, half hidden behind a column, watching her cousin with a small, private smile. Charlotte was mid-conversation with a group of donors, animated and glowing. It made sense now why Evelyn had been so protective, so careful not to draw attention to herself. She wasn't here for her own gain. She was here to make sure someone else had a shot. Nate stepped beside her, close enough to speak without raising his voice. You're good at fading into the background. Evelyn turned, not startled, just thoughtful. It's a skill. Why hide? Maybe I'm not hiding, she said. Maybe I'm just tired of trying to stand out in rooms where everyone already thinks they know what matters. He considered that, then nodded. Fair enough. They stood in silence for a moment, the music soft and elegant around them. Charlotte's impressive, he said. She's worked hard. Evelyn replied, but crowds aren't easy for her. She's brilliant, but the spotlight shakes her. Is that why you came? She glanced at him. That and the promise of shrimp cocktail. He laughed quietly. Well, I'm glad you did. Evelyn hesitated. Why Nate looked at her then. Really looked. Because you made me laugh. Because you said something honest. Because you didn't ask me what I drive or how much I donated this year. Her brow furrowed slightly. That's a low bar. Maybe, he said, but it's real. Another pause. Then, gently, you don't like these events either, do you? Nate exhaled. They're necessary, not enjoyable. But you're good at it, playing the part. That's the problem. He said, I'm too good at it. They stood together as the evening wore on, the room buzzing with practiced elegance. He noticed how she didn't fidget, didn't pretend to be charmed by the grandeur. She observed, quiet but present, and for the first time in a long time, Nate felt like he wasn't just being watched, he was being seen. A waiter approached with a message. Mr. Caldwell, your car is ready when you are. Evelyn arched an eyebrow. Leaving your own party? He smirked. It stopped being mine about an hour ago. I thought you were the host. I am, he said, but that doesn't mean I belong here more than you do. She tilted her head. Curious now. Come with me, he said, then held up a hand. Not far, just to the terrace. It's quieter. For a moment, she seemed to weigh it. Then, with a subtle nod, she followed him through the crowd and out onto the stone-floored terrace that wrapped around the ballroom. The city stretched beyond them, lights blinking against the night like 1,000 quiet promises. I used to come out here during intermissions, he said, when I was younger, before everything got too loud. Evelyn leaned on the railing, her expression unreadable. You grew up in this world. He shook his head. No, I built a company, then another. The money came after. The rest followed. Did you want it? He hesitated. At first, I thought it would fix things. And did it? His silence was answer enough. Evelyn turned to face him fully. So why stay in it? Because leaving means admitting I was chasing the wrong thing. That sounds honest. I'm trying to be. She studied him, eyes steady. It's harder than it looks, isn't it? Being seen, only when it matters. He said. The city hummed below. A gust of wind lifted a strand of her hair, and she tucked it behind her ear without breaking eye contact. What are you really doing here? Nathaniel, she asked softly. Tonight, she nodded. I was hoping someone might remind me why I started this in the first place. And did they? He smiled, but it wasn't polished or rehearsed. I think so. Neither of them moved for a long while. Then Evelyn straightened, brushing invisible lint from her dress. I should check on Charlotte. He didn't stop her, just said, You'll let me know if I ever overstep. She met his gaze. I've never been shy about closing doors. I got that sense. Then she was gone, slipping back into the ballroom, leaving Nate on the terrace, the sound of her voice still hanging in the air like a question he didn't know how to answer yet. But he would. Evelyn Hartley didn't sleep that night. She sat by the window in her small apartment long after Charlotte had gone to bed, the city's low hum seeping through the thin glass. The heels were long gone, her dress folded neatly over a chair, a cup of chamomile tea cooled beside her untouched. Nathaniel Caldwell's voice still lingered in her ears. Not what he said, necessarily, but how he said it. Calm, steady, like he meant it, and that, more than anything, scared her. She had been through this before, different faces, different names, same promises wrapped in charm. They always came on softly, leaning into her warmth, drawn to her steadiness. Then they would ask her to shift, to mold, to follow. And when she couldn't or wouldn't, they disappeared, like vapor. But Nathaniel had asked nothing of her, not a number, not a dinner, just to be seen. And that was dangerous, because Evelyn had spent years learning how not to be seen. It started long before the divorce, long before her ex-husband packed a single suitcase and said he needed to feel alive again. It started in her childhood, watching her parents speak in silences, watching her mother fold into herself until she was just hands and chores and worry lines. So Evelyn had learned early to carry the weight quietly. She became the kind of person others leaned on, the kind who remembered birthdays, kept promises, showed up without being asked, the kind who, somewhere along the way, forgot how to ask for anything in return. Now, at 42, she wasn't bitter, but she was cautious. And something about Nathaniel stirred up old instincts she thought she'd buried under layers of pragmatism and self-reliance. The next morning, Charlotte padded into the kitchen barefoot, still glowing from the previous night. He asked about me, she said, pouring coffee. Nathaniel Caldwell. Evelyn looked up. He did? Yeah. Said I had guts. Can you believe it? Evelyn smiled faintly. I can. Charlotte studied her for a moment. He also asked about you. Evelyn's hands paused over the sink. What did you say? That you don't date? That you once scared away a perfectly nice CPA by quoting Virginia Woolf at him? Evelyn snorted. He asked if I was a minimalist. I told him I preferred emptiness when it was intentional. Charlotte grinned. Well, Caldwell didn't look like a man who scares easy. Evelyn didn't reply. She rinsed her mug, dried her hands, and changed the subject. Later that week, A letter arrived, not an email, not a text, a real handwritten note, thick cream-colored paper, her name in deliberate, clean strokes across the front. Inside, Evelyn, there's a small cafe on Ninth and Madison. They make terrible coffee, but unforgettable pie. I'll be there Thursday at 4 in case you find yourself curious. And she read it twice, then again. Then she folded it neatly and tucked it between the pages of her recipe book, as if putting it somewhere ordinary might make it less complicated. She didn't decide to go. She just ended up there. The place was exactly as described: dingy tiles, scratched tables, a waitress who looked like she'd been waiting tables since the Nixon era. Evelyn arrived 5 minutes late, on purpose. Nathaniel was already seated, a slice of pie in front of him, untouched. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said, standing as she approached. "I wasn't either." He smiled, gestured to the seat across from him. She sat, folding her coat beside her. "So," she said, "you're a man of strong dessert opinions. I believe bad coffee sharpens the senses." She chuckled despite herself. "And pie dulls the judgment. Only if it's blueberry." The waitress brought over another slice and a fresh cup of coffee. Evelyn took a sip and winced. "Told you," Nate said. For a while, they didn't talk about anything serious. They discussed old diners, neighborhood changes, the impossible rent in Manhattan. Evelyn found herself relaxing, her shoulders lowering without her permission. Then he asked gently, "Why did you stop teaching?" Evelyn looked out the window. "My mother got sick, Alzheimer's. I couldn't manage both." "Do you miss it?" "Every day." Nate didn't offer sympathy. He just nodded, like he understood the kind of ache that didn't need fixing. "And you," she asked, "why the sudden interest in community work?" His eyes darkened, just slightly. "My mother struggled with depression. Most of her life, I think. She died before she ever got the help she needed." Evelyn's voice softened. "I'm sorry. I thought money could prevent that. That if you build enough walls, nothing can get in. Turns out, sadness doesn't knock, it seeps." They sat in silence, the kind that didn't beg to be filled. Outside, the light shifted, golden and kind. "I don't know what this is," Evelyn said after a while. "I don't know what you're doing. I'm not doing anything," Nate said. "I'm just sitting here, eating pie, talking to someone who makes me feel more like myself than I have in a long time." She studied him, searching for the trick, but there wasn't one. Still, she wasn't ready. Not for more. Not yet. "I'm not good at this," she said. "Neither am I." She stood. "Thank you for the pie. Any time." As she walked away, she didn't look back, but she could feel him watching, not with expectation, but with patience. It was, somehow, even more dangerous. It rained the day Evelyn Hartley agreed to see Nathaniel Caldwell again. Not the thunderous kind of rain that slammed against rooftops and windows, but a steady drizzle, gentle, persistent, the kind that made the whole world feel like it was wrapped in soft gray wool. They met at a small bookstore tucked between a laundromat and a shuttered bakery in Carroll Gardens. Nate had suggested it. "No one bothers you in a bookstore," he'd written in his note. "It's one of the last safe places." Evelyn arrived early this time, umbrella in hand, her boots damp from the sidewalk. The smell of paper and old wood met her at the door. The lighting was dim. the kind that made time feel slower. Nate was already there, seated in a corner beneath a sign that read Poetry and Essays. He looked up from the book in his hands as she approached, his smile quiet but certain. "You're early," he said. "I needed to be somewhere that didn't ask anything of me," she replied, setting her umbrella aside. He nodded. "This place usually works for me." Evelyn slid into the chair across from him. A brief silence settled. Not heavy, just still. "What are you reading?" she asked. "Mary Oliver," he said, holding up the book. "Her poems remind me to look up more often." Evelyn smiled. "I used to read her aloud to my students. Some of them didn't understand the words, but they liked the way the rhythm sounded, like water." Nate studied her for a moment. "I can picture that." She shifted, a little uncomfortable under the attention, even if it was soft. "You brought me here for a reason," she said. "What is it? I wanted to ask you something." He closed the book. "What would you do if you didn't have to worry about money?" The question caught her off guard. She blinked. "Why, because most people never get asked that," he said. "But it tells you everything about who they are." Evelyn looked down at her hands, tracing the line of her thumb. She thought of the old school building where she used to teach, of the students with second-hand backpacks and empty lunchboxes, of the nights she stayed late grading essays while her mother slept in the next room, already forgetting her name. "I'd build a space," she said quietly, "for kids who don't feel safe anywhere else. Not just a classroom, a center, a place that stays open late, has music, warmth, food that doesn't come from a vending machine, a place where they matter." Nate didn't interrupt, didn't smile or nod or commend her. He just listened, his expression unreadable but attentive. Evelyn felt her cheeks flush. "It's idealistic. I know. It's honest," he said, "and beautiful." She shifted again. "What about you?" He leaned back slightly, eyes on the ceiling. "I'd stop pretending I like boardrooms. I'd give more. Not just money time, presents. I'd build things that don't need my name on them." Evelyn tilted her head. "That sounds like someone who already has everything." "I don't," he said. "Not really." The air felt different, then charged, vulnerable. Evelyn reached for the coffee she hadn't touched yet, more to fill the space than from thirst. "You know," she said, "most people would have taken my answer and offered to fund it. Try to fix it. Or me." "I don't want to fix you," Nate said gently. "I want to understand you." Evelyn met his gaze, and, for a terrifying second, she believed him. They spent the next hour wandering the narrow aisles, sometimes speaking, sometimes not. Nate pulled a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird from a shelf and handed it to her. She found a battered guide to heirloom vegetables and teased him about his non-existent garden. It was easy? Too easy? Outside, the rain had stopped. Evelyn checked her watch and realized she was late for her mother's afternoon walk. She turned to Nate, suddenly unsure how to end something that hadn't felt like a date, but somehow mattered more. "I should go," she said. "Of course," he replied, stepping aside so she could pass. At the door, she paused. "Thank you for not talking too much." Nate smiled. "It's harder than you'd think." She opened the door, felt the cool air on her face. "Evelyn," he said before she stepped out. She looked back. "I'd like to see you again, only if you want." She hesitated, then said, I'll think about it. And then she was gone. That night, as she helped her mother into bed, Evelyn thought about quiet bookstores and the kind of people who didn't fill every silence with noise. Her mother's eyes, clouded by memory loss, searched her face. "Are you someone I love?" she whispered. Evelyn smiled through the ache in her chest. "Yes, Mama, always. Later, after the dishes were done and the apartment was still." Evelyn opened her journal and wrote down one sentence. "He asked me something no one ever did and waited for the answer." She didn't know what would come of it. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. But for the first time in a long time, she let herself wonder. Evelyn Hartley didn't expect the quiet to feel so loud. It had been 3 days since the bookstore, 3 days since Nathaniel Caldwell had looked her in the eyes and said he didn't want to fix her, only understand. She hadn't answered his note, hadn't replied to the message Charlotte mentioned he'd sent, thanking her for the time. She wasn't ignoring him. Exactly. She was bracing. Evelyn had lived enough life to know what often followed moments like that, when someone saw past the surface and said all the right things. It was easy to be sincere in safe spaces. But what happened when things got messy, when someone stopped being fascinating and started being inconvenient? Her ex-husband, Todd, used to say things like, "I love how strong you are," until the day he snapped. "Do you always have to carry the world like you're the only one who can?" And then he left. Now, Evelyn wasn't afraid of heartbreak. She'd survived it. What unsettled her was the way Nathaniel made her feel something more dangerous than pain. Hope. Hope was a currency she no longer trusted. That Friday, she agreed to meet Charlotte for lunch at a deli near her old school. When she arrived, Charlotte was already seated at the window, cheeks flushed with excitement. "He did it," she said, as Evelyn slid into the booth. "Did what Caldwell. He sponsored the youth reading room renovation, anonymously, but everyone knows it was him." Evelyn paused. "He didn't say anything to me." Charlotte shrugged. "He didn't make a speech. He just sent the check, with a note to the librarian that said, 'Because stories saved me once.'" Evelyn stared out the window, her thoughts storming. It wasn't the gesture that unsettled her, it was the motive. Was he trying to impress her? Was this some grand performance dressed up as philanthropy, or was it real? "You okay?" Charlotte asked, frowning. "I don't like being a project." Charlotte leaned forward. "You're not. I don't want this to become about pity." Charlotte's voice softened. "Ev, he doesn't pity you. He admires you." Evelyn looked away. "That's worse." She didn't mean to call Nathaniel that night, but her mother had had a hard day, confused, agitated, asking where her late husband had gone. Evelyn had spent an hour calming her, singing lullabies from decades ago until she finally slept. By the time the apartment was still, Evelyn felt frayed, raw. So she called the only person she knew wouldn't tell her to be strong. He answered on the second ring. "Evelyn, I shouldn't have called," she said quickly. "I'm glad you did." There was a pause. "She thought I was her sister today," Evelyn whispered. "She wouldn't look at me. Not until I put on her old blue sweater and hummed Moon River." He didn't speak right away. "Then I remember my mother singing that song, off key. She said it made her feel young again." Evelyn blinked hard. "I didn't call to talk about music. I know. They sat in silence, the kind that wrapped around grief like a blanket. "I heard what you did," she said finally. "At the school. I didn't do it for you," he said gently. "I did it because it should have been done. But I'd be lying if I said you didn't remind me why it mattered." Evelyn pressed the phone tighter. "I don't want to be your cause. You're not." "Then what am I?" He hesitated. "Important?" The word landed between them, solid and quiet and frightening. Evelyn swallowed. "I don't know what to do with that." "You don't have to do anything. I push people away," she said. "It's easier. I'm not asking you to pull me in." More silence. "Would you meet me tomorrow?" he asked. No talk of donations, no bookstores, just fresh air. "I'll think about it." He laughed softly. "You say that a lot, because I mean it." "I'll take it." They met the next morning at Prospect Park. The sky was pale blue, the kind that felt like a promise. Evelyn wore sneakers, a hoodie, and no makeup. Nathaniel brought coffee in paper cups and didn't try to kiss her or reach for her hand. They walked. "You don't do this often," she said. "Walk. Ask people to spend time with you when there's nothing to sign." He smiled. "Not lately." They passed kids playing soccer, dogs chasing after squirrels, an old man painting a bridge in watercolors. "This is what I miss," Evelyn said. "The small things, when life was slower." Nate glanced at her. "You could have that again, not with someone like you." His brows lifted. "What does that mean?" "It means you don't live in slow. You live in jet setting and scheduled dinners and high-rises and private elevators. You live in a world where people curate their smiles." Nate stopped walking. "And what world do you live in?" "Evelyn, one where people leave because you're too careful. One where you don't ask for help because you think needing anything makes you weak." Her jaw tightened. "That's not fair." "I'm not trying to be fair," he said. "I'm trying to be honest. You say you don't want to be someone's project, and I believe you, but you also don't want to be seen as someone who might need something. You've built walls so well, you can't tell the difference between boundaries and barriers." She stared at him, furious and fragile. Then she turned, walked a few paces away. "I didn't ask for this," she said without looking back. "I know. A beat, but I did." She turned then, slowly, her eyes glassy. "I don't want to be saved," she said. "I don't want to save you," he replied. "I just want to stay." And somehow that was worse, because it was the one thing she couldn't protect herself from. The days after Prospect Park passed in quiet. Evelyn Hartley didn't avoid Nathaniel Caldwell, but she didn't reach out either. There were no texts, no calls, no handwritten notes left in her mailbox. And strangely, that absence didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like space, space to breathe, to think, to listen not just for him, but to herself. She spent more time at the local community center, helping with after-school tutoring. The kids knew her now. They shouted her name when she walked in, tugged on her sleeves, brought her drawings of trees and stick figures with wild hair and giant smiles. One of them, Devon, age 9, always in mismatched socks, gave her a paper heart scribbled in purple marker. "Because you see people," he said matter-of-factly. She hadn't cried. Not then. But she'd kept the heart. That Thursday, while organizing old lesson plans in the center's storage closet. She found a box of her old classroom materials, posters she'd laminated herself, faded flashcards, a jar of pens that still worked. Her handwriting was everywhere neat, deliberate, hopeful. For a moment, Evelyn just sat on the floor and let the dust settle around her. So much of her life had been put on hold, not lost, just buried under obligation and fear. Later that night, Charlotte knocked on her bedroom door. "Do you know what he's been doing?" Evelyn looked up from the novel she wasn't reading. "Who, Caldwell?" Evelyn's chest tightened. "He's been helping with the old garment warehouse on 3rd, turning it into a youth hub art spaces, music rooms, a library wing. I ran into the project manager, said he doesn't even want his name on the plaque." Evelyn said nothing. Charlotte sat on the edge of the bed. "He asked about you." Evelyn's voice came quiet. "What did you tell him that you're scared? And that he probably is too?" Charlotte stood, kissed her on the forehead. "You don't have to say yes, but if you don't show up at least once more, just make sure it's because you don't want to, not because you're afraid to want." The next day, Evelyn walked the few blocks to the warehouse. The street was lined with scaffolding, and the building looked like any other abandoned industrial relic until she stepped inside. Sunlight streamed through high windows onto unfinished wooden floors. The smell of sawdust and paint clung to the air. Half the space was still raw plaster and insulation visible through the beams, but the bones were there. Open rooms, tall ceilings, shelves waiting to be filled. Nathaniel was standing near one of the windows, his jacket draped over a ladder, sleeves rolled up, hair tousled like he'd run his hands through it too many times. He didn't see her at first. She stood there, watching him, unsure if she'd speak or turn and leave. Then he turned, and he smiled, not surprised, not smug, just glad. "You came." She nodded, her hands in her coat pockets. "I wasn't sure I would. I was—" She looked around. "This is in progress," he said, "like me." A soft laugh escaped her before she could catch it. He walked toward her, but stopped a few feet away, respecting the invisible line she hadn't yet erased. "You didn't tell me," she said. "I didn't want it to be about you." "It is, only partly," he said. "The rest is about the kind of world I want to live in. And me?" He hesitated. "You reminded me that it's not too late to become that kind of man." They stood in silence. Evelyn walked further into the room, brushing her fingers along a frame that would one day be a door. "You were right," she said softly, "about the walls I build. I wasn't trying to wound you." "You didn't," she said. "You cracked something open. I think I needed that." Nathaniel nodded. "Quiet. Would you let me show you something?" She followed him through a side door into what would be a small garden courtyard. It wasn't much, just a dirt patch right now, bordered by bricks and hope. But someone had begun planting tiny green shoots poked through the earth, barely visible. "I used to garden with my mother," he said. "When she was well, she'd say, 'Nothing teaches patience like dirt.'" Evelyn knelt down and touched one of the seedlings gently. "Everything starts small," she murmured. "I thought I had to build empires to matter," he said behind her. "But maybe it's these kinds of places. Maybe they're the ones that last." She looked up at him. "You don't need to build anything to matter to me." Nate blinked. "Then what do I do, Stay?" she said. "Not when it's easy, when it's real." His voice dropped. "I can do that." She stood, brushed the soil from her knees. For the first time, she reached for his hand, not because she needed saving, but because she no longer wanted to walk alone. That evening, she returned to her apartment and found her mother sitting by the window, humming softly. Evelyn sat beside her. "Mama," she said, "there's a garden I want to help grow." Her mother smiled faintly, still staring outside. "Then plant it," and Evelyn did. Not all at once, but one seed at a time. The storm came without warning, not the kind with thunder or lightning, but the quiet, creeping kind. The kind that starts with a shift in the wind, a heaviness in the sky, a silence before everything changes. It began on a Tuesday. Evelyn Hartley had just finished a planning session at the warehouse site. The youth center project was moving faster than expected, thanks to Nate's quiet funding and a swarm of eager volunteers. Walls had gone up, windows were being installed, and for the first time in years, Evelyn felt like she was part of something that was becoming, not unraveling. Nathaniel Caldwell had walked her home that afternoon, their hands brushing but not quite holding. There was a tenderness in their silences now, a safety. "I'm meeting with the education board next week," he said as they neared her building, "about long-term programming." Evelyn smiled. "Look at you officially in the weeds," he grinned. "Thanks to you." But something in her tightened at the compliment, because sometimes, when things felt too good, Evelyn braced for them to fall apart. That night, as the rain finally came soft, insistent her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. Just a name. Todd, her ex-husband. A second message followed. "I heard you're building something new. Wondered if we could talk. I have regrets." Evelyn stared at the screen. Her chest felt tight, her fingers cold. She hadn't seen Todd in 6 years. Not since the night he walked out with a suitcase and a list of grievances she never got to defend herself against. He'd been her first real love, the man who promised forever until forever became inconvenient. Now, of all times. He wanted to talk. She didn't reply. But she didn't sleep either. The next morning, she was quiet at the site. Nate noticed immediately. "Bad night?" he asked. She hesitated. "Just ghosts." He didn't push, just offered her coffee and a place beside him while they reviewed the new floor plans. But later, as they walked the perimeter, Nate mentioned something that made her freeze. "I saw a comment on the project forum. He said, from a Todd, said he used to be married to one of our founders." Evelyn stopped mid-step. What he didn't say much, just something vague. "I lost her before I understood what she was worth." Her stomach dropped. "He reached out to me last night," she said quietly. Nate turned to face her, his brow furrowed. "Are you okay? I don't know." He didn't speak, just waited. "I haven't seen him in years," she continued. "And now just when things are moving forward, he shows up, like some unfinished chapter. What do you want to do? I don't know that either." He nodded. "You don't owe him anything." "I know," she said, "but I might owe myself something. Closure. Maybe. I'll support whatever you decide." She looked up. "Even if I need to see him." He didn't flinch, even then, but his voice had gone a little quieter, and Evelyn felt something inside her tremble. 2 days later, she met Todd in a small park near the waterfront. He looked older, grayer, a little worn around the eyes. They talked. He apologized, not with excuses, but with weight. I didn't leave because of you. He said, I left because I couldn't face what was happening to me. You were strong, Ev, always. And I hated that about myself, that I needed you more than you needed me. She didn't cry. She listened. Then she said the one thing she hadn't been able to before: you didn't just leave me. You left the version of me that trusted love could last. He nodded slowly. I know. I've worked hard to rebuild that, she continued. And it's not perfect, but it's real. And it's mine. They parted with a handshake and a quiet understanding that some things couldn't be undone, only understood. That night, she stood on the steps of the youth center as the sky faded into dusk. Nathaniel arrived minutes later, holding 2 coffees and a hesitant smile. You saw him, he said. I did. And it didn't wreck me. She replied, That's something. He nodded. And us? She stepped closer. I don't want to build anything on top of unfinished grief. So, thank you for giving me the room to close that door. You're not closing me out too, are you? He asked gently. She shook her head. No, I'm asking if you'll stay while I open another one. Nate exhaled. Only if we walk through it together. Evelyn took the coffee, then slipped her hand into his. And just like that, something shifted, not broken, not shattered, but released. The storm had passed, and what remained was still standing. The house sat at the corner of a quiet street in Park Slope, nestled between a florist that only opened on weekends and a faded bodega with hand-painted signs in the windows. Its brick exterior was chipped. Ivy curled around one side, and the front steps sagged just enough to give it character, but it was the door that caught Evelyn Hartley's eye. Painted a soft, worn blue, like the color of the sky just before it gives into dusk. I bought it last week, Nathaniel Caldwell said, standing beside her on the sidewalk, keys jingling in his palm. Needs work. The wiring's a mess, and the kitchen floor creaks. But, Evelyn glanced at him, but what I thought maybe we could fix it up. Together, she raised an eyebrow. You mean you want me to help pick tile colors while you pay someone to knock down walls? He laughed. Only if we agree on the tile. They stepped inside. The air smelled of dust and paint primer. Light filtered through large windows, casting soft patches on the bare wooden floors. Every corner held potential and the undeniable weight of something beginning. Evelyn walked slowly, touching the edges of the doorframe, imagining curtains, the scent of coffee in the morning, laughter echoing off the kitchen walls. I've never lived anywhere that felt like mine, she said quietly. Nate watched her from the archway. Then, let's make this one yours, ours, whatever it becomes. In the weeks that followed, they returned every weekend paint-streaked and plaster-covered. Evelyn argued for a deep green backsplash in the kitchen. Nate insisted on a farmhouse sink. They compromised on an old wooden table salvaged from a church sale and a mismatched set of chairs Charlotte found online. On Sundays, neighbors stopped by with lemonade, paint rollers, and unsolicited advice. Kids from the center drew chalk murals on the sidewalk. Even Evelyn's mother, on one of her good days, came to sit in the backyard while they planted herbs in mismatched pots. One afternoon, while Nathaniel struggled with a crooked cabinet hinge, Evelyn leaned against the counter, smiling. "You're terrible at this. I'm deeply offended," he said, mock scandalized. "I've watched at least 3 home renovation videos. Clearly not enough." He stood, brushed sawdust off his jeans, and stepped closer. "I never thought I'd do something like this." He said, "What? Domestic bliss? No. Something this real." Evelyn looked up at him. Neither did I. And in that small kitchen, with its half-hung shelves and sunlight on the floor, he kissed her. Not like a promise or a question, just a moment of quiet certainty. When they finally moved in 6 months later, the neighborhood threw a block party. Folding tables lined the street, covered in casseroles and homemade lemonade. Paper lanterns dangled between light poles, and someone brought a speaker that played old Motown tracks. Nate grilled burgers, while Evelyn organized a water balloon fight between the kids and the adults. Charlotte arrived with fresh-baked cookies and a story about accidentally texting a senator instead of her dog walker. As the sun dipped below the rooftops, Evelyn and Nate sat on the front steps, barefoot, plates balanced on their knees. "I like it here," she said, sipping from a mason jar of sweet tea. "Even with the leaky faucet, especially with the leaky faucet." He looked at her, soft and real. "I love you, Evelyn." She turned, met his eyes. "I love you too." It wasn't dramatic. There were no fireworks, no sweeping music, just 2 people who had seen each other flaws, fears, tenderness, and truth, and decided to stay. Later that night, after the tables were folded and the kids had gone home, Evelyn wandered into their small living room, trailing a blanket behind her. Nate was standing at the window, watching the lights flicker down the street. "We built this," he said. "We are building this," she corrected. He turned. "I want more of this. The everyday stuff, grocery runs, arguing about laundry, reading together without talking. You're a romantic." "No," he said. "I just finally know what it means to want something that lasts." She crossed the room and leaned her head on his shoulder. And for the first time in a long time, she believed it might just last. Autumn arrived slowly that year, with golden leaves spilling onto the sidewalks and a crispness in the air that made morning coffee taste deeper. The youth center on 3rd was nearly finished. Paint still clung to the corners of Evelyn Hartley's hands, and she couldn't remember the last time that had made her smile. Nathaniel Caldwell stood beside her as they surveyed the space. The sunlight through the high windows washed the new mural on the far wall. Bright hands of all sizes forming a giant tree, each leaf marked with a first name. He reached over, laced his fingers through hers. "You did this," he said. "We did this," she corrected, as always. That afternoon, they opened the doors. Children flooded in, their voices echoing through the halls. Parents followed, cautious at first, then grateful. Evelyn moved through the rooms, answering questions, showing the art supplies, pointing out the quiet reading space tucked beneath a skylight. In a corner office, one she hadn't asked for, but that Charlotte insisted on, they found a small framed photo. Evelyn, surrounded by children, laughing mid-story. Beneath it was a plaque for those who show up even when it's hard. She didn't cry, not in that moment, but later, as she watched Nate kneel to tie a child's shoelace, as if he'd been doing it his whole life. Something inside her gave way not in collapse, but in peace. Weeks passed. They fell into a rhythm. Nate worked mornings from the small den they'd converted into his office, making calls to partners and sketching out new ways to fund community projects. Evelyn opened the center each day, always arriving early enough to make tea before the first student walked in. Evenings were for each other, cooking, music, the occasional takeout when they both forgot the time. One Sunday, while walking through the neighborhood hand in hand, Nate paused outside a weathered building with ivy curling up its stone walls. The windows were boarded, the door cracked. "I bought it," he said simply. Evelyn blinked. "What for?" "For us," he said. "To fix up. A home that doesn't sit above the clouds. One that lives right here, on the same streets you've always fought for." She stared at him, then at the building. "You're serious? I've never been more—" She laughed, then stepped into his arms, kissed his cheek, and whispered, "You're impossible, but you love me?" "I do." They began renovations that spring. On weekends, they painted walls, argued about cabinet handles, and ate dinner sitting on the floor. Nate broke a drawer. Evelyn planted basil in the window box. They filled the new house with books, photos, the smell of cinnamon and paint. Music drifted through the open windows, sometimes jazz, sometimes silence that felt just as melodic. The neighborhood welcomed them like family. The kids from the center dropped by with paper flowers and drawings of Ms. Evelyn's house. Charlotte hosted an impromptu rooftop poetry night. Evelyn's mother, in one of her clearest moments, called the new kitchen the heart of it all, and then forgot she'd ever said it. Still, Evelyn remembered. On the evening of their first anniversary in the house, they sat under mismatched string lights in the backyard, barefoot, plates balanced on their laps. Nate turned to her, his gaze steady. "I want to ask you something." Evelyn smiled. "Don't make it too dramatic." He held up a hand. "No rings, no speeches. Just this: will you keep building this life with me? Not because we promised anything, but because we choose it. Again and again." She set down her plate, took his hand. "I already do." That night, as they climbed into bed, Evelyn stared at the ceiling fan, turning lazily above. "I used to think love meant never falling apart," she said softly. Nate shifted beside her. "What do you think now?" "That real love means knowing you will, and choosing to stay anyway." He pulled her close, and in that small house with its blue door and uneven floors, two people who once believed they were too broken, too late, too tired, slept soundly, because what they had wasn't perfect. It was just real, and that made it enough to stay. As we journey through life, many of us carry quiet heartbreaks, choices we never made, words we never said, love we once gave away without return. Evelyn's story reminds us that it's never too late to begin again, not in a grand, sweeping way, but in the slow and steady decision to show up, to trust, and to open our hearts even when they've been bruised before. True love, as Evelyn and Nathaniel show us, isn't about perfection or performance. It's about presence. It's about staying when things are messy, listening without fixing, and seeing the value in someone not for what they offer, but simply for who they are. This story isn't just about romance. It's about community, about reclaiming your place in the world, about remembering that healing doesn't mean forgetting what hurt you. Heal when you choose to grow anyway. And perhaps the most powerful lesson, You don't have to do it all alone. So, wherever you are in your journey, whether building from scratch or gently restoring something long forgotten, know this. It's okay to start again, and it's okay to let someone stay right where the light finds you. Thank you for spending your time with us and letting this story touch a part of your heart. If it made you feel something, hope, warmth, maybe even a quiet sense of belonging, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing meaningful stories that connect us all, one heart at a time.